story is a story of resilience, a story of courage, and a story of perseverance. When I was in grade 2, I lost my mother, and I was only 7. The demise of my mother forced me to go and stay with my grandmother. My grandmother was a superhero. She was a mother of the house, a father of the house, and a grandmother of the house. She could make sure that we have something to eat. I and my cousin have the opportunity to go to school. And because she was old, like she couldn't have any other means of survival except farming. That situation really pushed me to start hard so that one day I can stand as I'm doing right now, giving back to the community, making sure that other girls in the community, their welfare is protected.
In the past few years, Zimbabwe has experienced a number of extreme weather events. In 2016, we experienced a regional drought, which affected most parts of the country. And more recently, we experienced Cyclone Yande, which also had devastating impacts in many parts of the country. A number of schools were washed away, whole villages essentially went underwater, a lot of people died. During the drought, families lost their assets, they lost their livestock. Climate change is causing increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as droughts, such as cyclones, and women and girls are disproportionately affected by climate change.
Climate change is one of the most urgent issues of our time. It's also a social and intergenerational injustice. Those who have contributed least are the most impacted. A changing climate affects everyone, but it's the world's poorest and those in vulnerable situations, especially women and girls who bear the brunt of environmental, economic and social shocks. Nitya Rao is Professor of Gender and Development, School of International Development at the University of East Anglia.
Across societies, I think women are responsible for household maintenance, for putting food on the table, for ensuring the food security and well-being of their households. They are also engaged in the primary sectors in a majority of countries, especially in the developing world, whether it is farming or livestock raising or forest produce collection and so on. We know that with any kind of climate variability, which we are seeing increasingly, whether it's in the form of extreme events or it's in the form of drought or floods, that these affect the primary sectors the worst.
The food we consume on daily basis in the developing world, 80% of it is being produced by female farmers, which are oftentimes invisible in their category of small-scale holder farmers. Climate change has been causing hard times on small-scale farmers as it affects their production capacity, the availability of food, and the chances for them to earn a living.
We have a lot of situations, especially in Zambia, in Africa, throughout the whole world really, where young women and girls can only acquire 1 acre of land, and yet men can acquire hundreds and thousands of hectares, and that's a big problem.
A lot is being expected from a woman. She shouldered many responsibilities. She's a caretaker. She has to do a lot of daily chores that includes fetching water and firewood. So if we have sudden disasters like cyclones, it is difficult for women to navigate the challenge. In case of a disaster, those kind of women can't just live there. They are bound to stay back and protect the children, perhaps protecting their crops or their animals. Women and children, as well as girls, are 14 times more likely to die in those kind of uncertainties.
Women and girls experience the heightened social, economic and health impacts of climate change. Environmental disasters have a direct and negative impact on girls and women. Jessica Cooke, Resilience and Climate Change Policy Officer, Plan International.
When families' income and ability to survive are put at risk, child marriage can be seen as a way to reduce the financial burden on the family. And there's also the belief that girls will be better protected and cared for in a marriage. And this can actually cause the early onset of certain life transitions, for example, early pregnancy, which can really trap girls in a cycle of intergenerational poverty. During and after extreme weather events, girls are at increased risk of violence and exploitation, including sexual and physical abuse and trafficking. And these risks are heightened when collecting water and firewood, which is taking an increasingly longer time, or when staying in temporary shelters. Girls are often also the last to eat, and so may experience malnutrition, which can also make them more susceptible to the different diseases that are increasing because of the climate crisis. And lack of clean water can also cause further health issues, especially when they're menstruating or when they're pregnant.
Women and girls hold the power to strengthen the world's resilience to climate change, but face a range of challenges. Gender-based violence and exploitation rises as resources dwindle, land becomes increasingly uninhabitable, and climate change intensifies.
If there are floods, it also means that the families will be forced to live in improper shelters, and that also posed another risk of increasing violence against women. You can just imagine a woman with her children in an improper structure by the night. Men can come to abuse them, or even thieves to steal from them.
I was very concerned that for younger women, they're taking into a lot of risky activities like casual sexual services, for instance, in order to earn some money to feed their young children. You find an increase in HIV taking place in the area, and lack of adequate health services, lack of childcare services, which also really puts these women at greater risk, that they need to earn money quickly because they can't leave their children for a long period of time.
Girls' education fits into this because it's both negatively affected by the climate crisis and is a key solution to tackling it. Even before COVID-19, we were a long way from gender equality in and through education. And this gap is just widened. Entrenched gender norms mean girls stand a lesser chance than boys of ever stepping foot in a classroom. If they do, this can be interrupted at any point by climate shocks and stresses, and mean they may never return to school as boys' education is prioritised over theirs. This exacerbates the gender divide, as unequal access to quality education puts girls at further risk. They have less access to information and knowledge on climate risks and the skills on how to prepare, respond and anticipate to these. Girls' education is one of the most transformative solutions for a climate just world, yet is the most overlooked, especially in climate and education policies. Not one country in the world has recognised the potential of girls' education in their national climate strategy.
I always say we rise by lifting up others. So I applied for Earth University, and with the help of my Comfort Association sisters, I made it to Earth University, where I studied agricultural sciences, international resources management. With the knowledge I gained at University, I founded Chashi Foods, and the whole 2018, we're working on a business plan and reaching the community to get to understand the magnitude of the problem. I just asking them if we could come up with this innovative idea and bring it to you as a solution. Are we going to get market? So the answer was yes. Through Comfort Association network, we have been also doing a lot in building climate change resilience, learning from others through a cascade system. We have a smart climate agriculture guide. We are aiming to train one community member, and that community member will go and train another community member, empower them thus creating the ripple effect.
Dr. Christina Cooke is a fellow at the Brookings Institution working on girls' education and climate change.
Research has shown us the many positive ripple effects of educating girls, and these ripple effects extend to humanity's capacity to accelerate action for climate change. So, for example, we know that education is a crucial step to girls' empowerment, and given the linkages and the root causes of the climate crisis, empowering girls through education to reach their full potential is a critical step to disrupting the social and the economic structures driving the exploitation of the planet. But to make progress towards climate justice, we really need to ensure that girls have access to quality, empowering, and transformative education. So this means, at a minimum, education must include basic knowledge of climate science, climate change, and it must include an orientation towards the development of sustainability competencies and green skills. These skills and competencies are essential for building more pro-environmental behaviors. But at its most transformative, education must be geared towards shifting the way we think about and the way we view and the way we care for ourselves, for others, and our natural world. At the same time, the transformative education for climate action is at its heart also capable of disrupting deeply held gender norms. We cannot think about rebalancing our relationship with the natural world if we view half of the population as less capable, less worthy, and less human. So this means that education has to address social inequalities, structural inequalities, economic injustices, and destructive relations of power. So we really need to see this transformation where, climate action is at the heart of education.
I also think it's important for girls' education to enable them to play a role in a gender-just green transition. And that isn't just about having the kind of classic STEM type skills so that they can work in green industries. It's also about fostering environmental stewardship, questioning systems and processes which uphold processes that damage climate change. So it's about thinking about girl activists like Malala or Greta and how we can create more of those to create that better future and a better, greener economy.
The things that I believe is one of the biggest solutions to the climate justice movement in regards to feminist action as well, and that is a change in the education system. I strongly believe that the education system is too based on the regurgitation of facts to pass an exam and be lost right afterwards into the big bad world of university. It doesn't really focus on our skills and our talents. It doesn't focus on the climate justice movement. It doesn't focus on how us as Generation Z, the young women and girls of Generation Z, can actually be a part of the solution. I strongly believe that we need to integrate, redevelop, and we need to redesign a system that ensures that climate justice is being made forefront within our journey in school. I believe that we need to ensure that women and girls are being reliably informed on what the situation actually is in the ground.
If a woman is gaining a ground in education, that means she's also gaining a ground in fighting climate change issues. We need to be sustainable in the way that we farm, to be sustainable in the way that we even consume what we have farmed. The floods carrying away the crops, leaving the children vulnerable, without food to eat, destroying the sources of income for their parents to send them to school. So we have been training the mother support group in those communities on how to adopt, how to cope up with the situation, how to produce food sustainably using climate smart tools, and to promote feeding programs in schools. And we also donated things to the affected families, paying school fees, providing food to make sure that we are keeping those children in school.
When women participate in decision-making at national and community levels, they can help devise effective climate change solutions that build stronger communities. Women and girls are key to advancing climate action. Former President of Ireland, gender equality and climate justice champion, Mary Robinson.
Women and girls are absolutely essential in addressing the climate crisis. I have seen this over and over. I took part in a high-level group of women ministers on gender and climate and heads of agencies in order that we would allow and make space for the voices of grassroots women, indigenous women, and young women, because they had so much to say. And they said it. When they came into the floor, because they were part of delegations, not out in the space for civil society, they would make such a difference. And then I've worked with grassroots women who are working so hard in drought. They have to go further to get the water, but they're determined to make their communities resilient. And the way they do it is by organizing. They organize local women's groups, and that makes such a difference. And they've learned how to assert a kind of collective leadership at local level, which has got the respect of the men in the village and the young in the village, that the women are actually there driving the building of resilience of necessity. They know they have to. They know what's happening. They see it. They don't understand why it's happening often, but they know they have to deal with it. And it's their courage, it's their entrepreneurial endeavor in very difficult circumstances that I have found totally inspiring.
We really need to think about longer term measures, about creating an enabling environment which can support women's collective action. Women have been at the forefront of climate action. The symbol, of course, globally has been the young schoolgirl Greta Thunberg, who, in fact, in one of her interviews said that her parents would like her to be in school, but she was out of school protesting because she really felt that this was a crisis and parents, elders, policymakers needed to take action now. It was not something that could be postponed. And from my own work, I would like to say that this is absolutely right, because when there's any kind of climate variability or climate action, we find that women are at the forefront of resisting it and taking climate action.
Dr. Katherine Wilkinson is a writer, strategist, teacher, and editor of All We Can Save: Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis.
If we have to transform society, we need transformational leadership to get us there. And to my mind, that is leadership that is both more characteristically feminine and more committedly feminist. When women and girls are present and leading, when there is gender parity at the decision-making table, the outcomes for the planet are better. And that means the outcomes for lives, livelihoods, communities are also better.
I believe that one thing that we need to emphasize is that young women and girls are meaningfully involved when it comes to these public decision-making forums in which climate justice solutions are being taken. And one thing that we really need to put out there is that we really do have the solutions. We have the experience, we have our stories to tell, and our stories carry so much power. We have the passion and we have the energy, and we really just need to be given a chance to air out these solutions. And so we need to ensure that young women and girls are meaningfully involved and that they meaningfully participate in these public decision-making forums.
If we want to transition our economies to ones that are built off of low carbon and renewable energies and technologies, and if we want to transition our food systems and our land management systems to sustainable and regenerative models, we're not going to be able to do that fully if girls and women continue to be denied the right to a quality 12 years of quality and empowering education, if they're held back from transitioning to innovating in and leading green sector industries, if girls and women are subject to the expectation that their value and worth rests in how many sons they bear, or if they shoulder the extra burden of unpaid care and domestic work, and if girls and women continue to fear for their lives in the face of toxic masculinity and violent patriarchy.
Climate change affects everyone. Our future survival depends on our global response. So everyone has a part to play in fighting it. Women and girls are leading the call to action.
Why would we want girls to have a voice? Well, we see why. Because they don't compromise. They want us not to listen to them with their Fridays for Future, but to listen to the science. And they are not satisfied. And they don't take our incremental improvements as being adequate. And I bless them for it, because we need a strong, implacable, truth to power voice, which girls can have. And they want to have a secure future, and they are entitled to it. and they should hold us to account.
One thing I can assure you is we have the solution to world hunger in one girl somewhere. We have the solution to some of the biggest problems in one little girl, on one woman, or whoever it may be. We just need to really redesign the system to ensure we bring out that potential and that they can actually do what needs to be done.
In the next 20 years, I would like to see every girl in the community empowered, leading a successful business, being a role model to those young girls in the community, so that those young girls will go with dreams. And they say girls with dreams, they'll become women with vision. I want every boy and every man in the society to understand that girls' education is also important for them, because it brings food in the table and a happier and healthier home, as well as the planet. I also want to see more people collaborating in sending girls to school, collaborating in empowering girls, collaborating in making sure that every girl in the society should not be left behind, and their potential or capacity to lead a successful life is tapped into.
Wonderful. I am so glad to be here with a set of fantastic speakers today to talk about the importance of education for really feminist climate action. I am Lucia Fry. I'm Senior Director of Girls Education and Gender Equality at Room to Read, an international nonprofit that seeks to end gender inequality through education. And I'm thrilled to be moderating today a conversation with wonderful activists and experts on climate justice and education. And I'm particularly thrilled to have this conversation because I come from a gender justice perspective. I'm a gender expert and actually started my career almost 20 years ago with a specific focus on climate justice and gender. And so I am thrilled that in many ways there is a lot more conversation these days around this aspect. I'm a bit less thrilled that there hasn't been a lot of action following that conversation and following really a realization that gender was key for education, that gender was key for climate, this realization has been there for such a long time, actions not as much. So I would like to ask these amazing set of speakers to introduce themselves, and by doing so also respond to one question, which is what really excites them about the movement of climate justice, feminist climate justice, how it intersects with education, and what instead concerns them. And I will go, according to whoever I see first on my screen. So Christina, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Cooke, and I'm a fellow at the Brookings Institution at the Center for Universal Education, where I do research on girls' education and climate change. And I'm also the Associate Director of the Monitoring and Evaluation of Climate Change Education Project. And I am really excited about this mobilization of feminist actors for climate action, because it means that what I have previously seen as distinct silos of work and activity and advocacy and efforts really coming together, filling in a gap of action that is very much needed at this time. But at the same time, I'm very concerned because I know that wherever there is feminist action, there is reactivity from right-wing groups that hold at their heart values of white supremacy and toxic masculinity that creates an unnecessary polarization of an issue, a set of issues, gender justice and climate justice, that don't need to be, that aren't polarizing. So I'm concerned about that reactivity.
Thank you very much, Christina. Such an important point, and I hope we'll have the opportunity to discuss that more in the conversation. Renata, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. First of all, such an honor to be here with all of these wonderful speakers. My name is Renata Alvarenga. I'm based in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and I'm the founder and director of Empodera Clima, which is a youth-led initiative of the nonprofit Care About Climate. And what we do is create and share content on gender and climate justice, focused on young people, specifically young people in Latin America and the African continent, just so we can try and make all of these issues more accessible to young people in the global south. And what I'm most excited about in this movement is definitely the people. So being part of these discussions, going to conferences and being able to be with alongside feminists that are taking action is absolutely wonderful. There's so many powerful people in this movement. And what concerns me is the fact that I still think we need to talk more about intersectional approaches in the climate movement. So this would mean talking about queer women, indigenous women, Black women, and making sure they're included and acting as leaders in the conversation as well.
Thank you, Renata. Such an important point, and we will definitely talk about it a little more. Marinelle.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marinelle Baldo. I come from the Philippines, and I am a registered social worker and an international climate justice advocate. So what I am excited about this is that at last there is a platform where women are being heard. At last there is a concept of feminist climate justice that already exists, and it is a platform for girls and women to be heard on how our sector is being affected by this crisis and how vulnerable we are, yet how we can really contribute a lot in the development of some projects and solutions to climate justice. And that what concerns me is how people will just shrug it off, like they're just women, and those traditional way of thinking that women should just be in their houses and should just take care of the children and do the house chores. That is one of my concerns, really. And how we will really include those in the grassroots, those indigenous people, and letting them really raise their voices and really tell us what solution they are thinking for themselves.
Thank you, Marinelle. Very, very important points. Hindu.
Thank you very much, and hi everyone. So my name is Hindu Umaru Ibrahim. I am from Chad in Sahel region in Africa, and I'm working on climate change, indigenous people rights in all the environmental protection. So I'm already coming from an indigenous communities and leading an indigenous organization, women organizations there. So what excites me being in this form, in this platform or on this fora, it's having all the women at least coming together and not working in silo in different thematics like gender differently or equity differently, justice differently, climate differently. We all take all the important issues for our life together, and putting them in the same basket where we can fight together is the most important and excited for me. And what's worrying me, as already Renata and Marinelle talked about it, how we can include all the women, how we can include indigenous women. And women with colors, we can say that. I mean, the marginalization have a different level of having a different appartenance of a woman or being a woman in which place, and how we can include also the girls and those women who didn't went to school, because women in education is very important, but there is also informal education for us who is very important in our traditional knowledge. It's called education in our mother tongue. It is not only can be limited to the writing or reading or speaking a foreign or colonization languages. So if we can manage to include all those aspects, I think we will be a better platform again.
Thank you so much, Indu. And I know several of us work on education beyond reading and writing, on the importance of life skills, of leadership development, of self-empowerment and efficacy for girls. And therefore, I'm thrilled to hear your perspective. And Bridget.
Thank you so much, Lucina. It's really wonderful to be with so many, not just activists and leaders in this work, but friends. My name is Bridget Burns. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based off of unceded Lenape lands, or so-called Brooklyn. And I am the director of the Women's Environment and Development Organization, We Do, which is a 35-year-old global advocacy organization working at the intersection of women's rights, environment, and sustainable development. And I think what excites me as being a constant student, basically, of the history of my own organization and the incredible feminist ideologies, epistemologies that came before me, is seeing how in many ways this is a moment in which, if I could mark the trajectory of conversations of talking about the intersections of gender equality and climate change, where we have really pushed into a much more intersectional and structural conversation. Although, as my colleagues have pointed out, it's really a starting point where people, even just the framing of talking about feminist action for climate justice really excites me, because it gets us to the opportunity to make sure we are not falling back into, how do we mainstream women into a polluted stream? How do we mainstream women into ineffective climate solutions or false solutions? Thereby, how do we really take a deeply intersectional approach to these issues that looks at all of the reasons why we have failed in society to center a care economy and a caring approach, and how that is both gendered and how it is affecting our environment. So I'm really excited about that, because I think within that there's the possibility for building power and transformation. And I am equally as concerned, in the same way that Christina has, because I think that the young feminist imaginary is completely uncompromised in terms of what it is that we need to do to build power and to get climate justice. And I think that there are many forces on the right, if you will, or more, let's say, steeped in patriarchy and white supremacy, that understand that we have a deep imaginary of what could be, and we're building power to get there. And we need to be equally as strong to protect those who are at the front lines of this. And I worry about that, because I think that we're seeing a lot of violence against frontline defenders, Indigenous women, and we need to be equally as strong in both our visions of the future, the education to get there, and how we protect those at the front lines of this.
Thank you, Bridget. And, I so much agree. And this reminds me so much of how really powerful this movie was now in showing us the complexity and the incredible potential of this movement. I loved how the movie really started with this image of the grandmother as a superhero. They just had to be resilient and make everything possible. And then really talked about the importance of working with women and girls so that they are educated, but as Hindu was saying, educated beyond literacy, educated to be really the kind of climate activists and leaders that will be able to talk truth to power, and that will really not compromise, as Mary Robinson was saying, and will be the transformational leaders that ultimately the world needs. And so in that note, I would like to ask Christina, I know you are researching since many years the link between education, climate action, and particularly looking at education that is useful for girls, that addresses girls' vulnerabilities, needs, and potential. And in that, I would like to ask you, how do you think that education can really be leveraged to serve climate justice and really include a strong feminist perspective? What are the research gaps? What are the opportunities?
Yeah, I think such an important question, especially for trying to understand how to leverage education. And I think in order to answer that, we have to back up and try to understand what is education doing at present. And I think many of us, perhaps in this Zoom call, would agree that it's definitely not doing enough, and that the education that we have today is not going to get the kind of action that we need urgently, not only for the climate, but also for women and girls around the world. So I think there's a research gap. There's also an implementation gap. So in terms of the implementation gap, we know that already from existing research that there are particular kinds of education models that are more effective and more potentially transformative at leading to the kinds of pro-environmental behavioral change that's needed, right? But these kinds of educational models, experiential learning, student-driven, really centered in place, and really drawing on some of the effective pedagogies around effective climate change education is currently missing, because we have education systems that are structured to really tailor to standardized tests that are, that then influence the way that the teachers spend their time in the classroom and don't go out and talk about issues of climate change or climate justice. So I think, it's really trying to understand that implementation gap around what we know about effective climate change education, or education that can lead to pro-environmental behaviors, and what's not happening, right? So in studies that we've looked at, and study that we conducted as well, really shows that, out of the countries that are submitting their nationally determined contributions and their national adaptation plans to the UNFCCC, they're not talking about education for children. And this is a huge implementation gap. But then when we talk about the kind of education that's needed for the transformative outcomes, the kind of outcomes that could also disrupt the underlying gender inequality and structures of power that reproduce the values of human domination and exploitation over the natural world, that then spills over to how we treat other humans. I mean, this is an area where I think there are lots of research gaps. We know intuitively, we know from our work as practitioners, that an education that targets unequal power relations is the kind of education that will help open our mindsets and open our worldviews to understanding how, as Bridget said earlier, the really need to center care in our relations, and to center care in our education. And these are the things that are missing, and that can really just perpetuate the structures and mindsets that drive oppression and exploitation and violence, again, particularly vulnerable groups like girls and women. So there's research there. We need to leverage it. There are research gaps that we need to fill, but ultimately we need to be putting that into implementation.
Yeah, thank you, Christina. And you really talked so well about the imbalance of power. And in that, I wanted to ask Renata, how do you see education needing to change to really serve climate justice and the feminist movement in a way that's really, truly intersectional, and that takes into account intersectionality? And why are we still so behind on that?
Definitely. That's a challenging question. It's a really good one, though, I think, when we're talking about the feminist movement and the climate movement. I mentioned this a little bit in my intro, but we have to take an intersectional approach. I feel like in the last few months, it has come a lot more in the media or in the conversations in webinars and academia as well, which I think is really good. But basically, it's a very simple concept, right? It's the fact that discrimination happens on a basis of variety of different factors. So we have to consider not just gender inequality, but we have to consider racism, sexism, just other issues that are overlapping. And I think that just has to be in education when we're talking about environmentalism as well. And it's a really clear, direct concept, I would say. We saw that a little bit in the video that we saw earlier. The idea of intersectional environmentalism is the idea that Black, brown, low-income communities have less access to a lot of the resources that we need, so less access to clean water and sanitation. And therefore, it's really important that we not only take that into account and understand the vulnerability, but also consider the other part of that, which is the leadership aspect, right? I feel like there a lot of times climate change discussions or research will talk a lot about vulnerability and how women are more affected and indigenous peoples are more affected, but not so much about the leadership role that they can have and should have and are having, honestly, in a lot of spaces. So in education, that's pretty crucial. And I would say specifically on young women and young girls, that's a really clear example. So for example, droughts and water scarcity have a larger impact on young women and young girls, because when they are in many developing countries walking for miles to look for water for their families, they're not in school, they're not getting an education. So it's really important that we take into account all of these movements together, the Black Lives Matter movement, the LGBTQIA+ movement as well, feminist movements for equal pay. All of that is kind of correlated and leads up to the biggest issue that we have in our time, which is facing the climate crisis. So I think at this point in time, and everything that we've seen in the media, everything that's going on, there's no denying that intersectionality has to be at the forefront. And the most simple and direct way that I can think of doing that is through education of young girls at a young age, because they're the persons that are going to take action in the future. They're going to be the future presidents, prime ministers. So I think it's really crucial that we implement that into school systems, not just climate justice, but the intersectional lenses to climate justice.
Thank you. Yeah, we definitely hope them to be the prime ministers and presidents in way larger numbers than we have seen so far in history. So that's definitely something we hope to achieve. And, you know, you talked about the importance of taking into account different groups. Hindu, I wanted to ask you a question because you wear so many hats. You are really taking into account in your work environmental activism, feminist activism, indigenous people's rights, and therefore really wanted to ask you, how does an education for climate justice serve all those different groups, and how can it be really true to all those different concepts and support the rights of women and indigenous groups and be progressive on climate?
Sure. Education for climate justice can serve to give voices. So that's all what we are asking for. Maybe at the earlier age, people just to give the floor to those who went to school, those who have the same level with them, to sit down and take the decision with them. But the movement helped it to show that we can be diverse and we can all take decision in our life, because it is not just each group that have to decide for his own. So it is for everyone. When we take the decision, it's impact my grandmother who is in our communities, who is in the deep of our forest, who never saw the market and who is very far from all the development. And this decision affect the other grandmother who is in the Amazon and of course in the Arctic. So that's why it is very important that the movement open the space and give the voice to the indigenous communities, indigenous women and girls to sit in the tables and take the decisions. It can happen in two ways. At the global level, where we all know each other, we all fighting for the better policies and better decisions. So in these places, I think privileging indigenous women to be in the tables when there is a women discussion, or when there is just a general discussions on any other crisis. And that's also when I watch the video, I get I feel they're talking about me. Because when the lady talked about her grandmother, I'm like, oh, it's the same with me. And when Mary Robinson talked about the movement of ministers, women, and then when they are talking with indigenous peoples, I take part in many breakfasts organized by the Women Ministerial, and of course with my sister Birgit here. So we come there as not ministers. We were not ministers, but we sit down and we talk and we discuss, and then they listen from us and they support us informally during the negotiations. So in this fora, I think we can support each other and give the voices. And if it is not our action place, the person who is there can take our voices and make it his in this place. And the second is at the local level. So where all the action are happening, we are missing a lot because we do not include women, and especially the indigenous women. When they design the project, when they design the program, they already sitting in the offices and making all these decisions and going to the community, say, oh, we have a project for the women, or no, we have a project, but we wanted to see also the women to get involved. I'm like, no, you cannot do it like that. Those women need to decide for themselves how to design this project, which kind of project that they want, how they can implement it. Because when you come and you leave, they are going to continue them life there. And the sustainability we are talking about, it's if I design it, I own it, and I can continue. If you design it for me, I can benefit, but I cannot be an actor or a partner of this project. So that's how we can give the voice and empower the indigenous women and listen from them from the ground. I give you this last example. You know, when people come to the communities, so they think that they know everything from you because they see you that you are working a miles to get water, you don't have food. They say, oh, so this is your problem, we will resolve it. But they do not understand what creates this problem. For me, it is not giving me the water who is important for me, but what creates that I don't have the water next to me, because I didn't grow up like this. So tackle the deep of this problem, resolve it, and then the rest of our problem can be resolved. So listening from indigenous women, giving them the space, it's really very important to the educations that we are talking about.
Thank you, Hindu. Thank you. And you know, I was wondering on that, and then we will start. I will open the floor to others also to comment on what we have heard. But I wanted to hear from Marinelle and Bridget, because you both work at the global level as activists in those advocacy fora, and also are very much linked to grassroots movements. How can we make sure that we evolve this conversation and take into account education in a way that it can really prepare girls both for being global activists and leaders, and at the same time for really having their knowledge rooted in their communities and in the work happening there?
Yeah, well, I came from a grassroots movement and then went to the international platform, and I really agree 100% on what Hindu has said. I truly believe as a social worker that this grassroots community, the people in the grassroots, are actually the one or the primary source of information how we can solve their problems. Because as a humanitarian actors, we should not go there and tell them that this is your problem, this is the solution. Because actually how they can, that's really right, that they can own the project, that they can own the programs if they will be the one thinking about it, deciding about it, and then implementing about it. And for me, just to really to have an inclusion of our education to the girls in the grassroots is to really localize those materials in a way that they will understand it in their own language, that they will understand it in their own setting, that they will understand it in their own perspective. Because if we will just send those books to the mountains or to the grassroots communities, to far-flung communities, and then it is written in different language or it is written in different dialect, they will not just they will just read it, but they will not really empathize to it, or they will not really tell it for themselves that it is their experience. So for me, to really have an inclusive education is to really get what are their perspective in the grassroots, and then tell a story about the community, that and make a book for that community, because that is how you can own that this is my story, and this is how I should be educated, and this is my problem, and this is me telling the world that this is the solution to this problem that we are facing right now. And for me, when I saw Super Typhoon Haiyan happened last 2013, I was just a local activist in our community. I go to far-flung communities to educate people about the basics of climate change. So we do it locally. We do theater recitals, radio broadcasting. We bring with us a generator, because a lot of communities do not have an electricity. So we make a way that we will show them what is the basics of climate change. Because of this far-flung community, they don't even know what is climate change. They don't even know that there is an injustice in the gender, that there is a gender issue, and how connected they are, and how we suffer as girls and women in far-flung community, because we don't know that we deserve more. We don't know that we should be treated more in terms when there is a disaster, when there is an emergency, because we don't know that it is even a problem. So I came from that movement, and then I realized that I should do more. I should bring these stories to the national and to the international level, so that they will know what we are doing already in the grassroots, so that they will know that we are already solving our problems in the grassroots, and we just need them to support us, to hear our stories, and to make their contribution in the international level, so that we could already adapt and mitigate in our own way in the grassroots movement. So for me, it is very important that we should go down to the level of the grassroots, and then act locally but think globally.
Absolutely. No, I think, it's so important, and there is definitely so much knowledge. And I also loved your point on materials that are really contextualized. Room to Read is preparing now a series of books on climate action that will have a number of characters that will also be girls, and kind of like applied to different contexts and countries. And we were really, struck by the lack of such stories that reflect those local realities, and how a lot of the materials out there, in fact, do not relate to the realities of the kids that are expected to read those books, and therefore will not really empathize with those stories. So thank you, absolutely. Bridget, anything you'd like to add?
I mean, it's been such a rich input, even for such a short amount of time. I think the one thing that I'll echo from this question of what is the role in sort of being a feminist global policy advocate, and for me, very much similar to Hindu's example of maldevelopment, essentially, where someone, flies into a community and deciphers what is wrong and then comes up with a solution. To be a global policy advocate and to be feminist is not to go into a space like the UN climate negotiations, where we do engages a lot and come up with our solution to global challenges and problems, and then create a bunch of documents where we translate, okay, here's what we decided at a global level, now here it is in your language so you can articulate it. It's absolutely the opposite. It's really seeing these global policy spaces as part of an ecosystem of building power, essentially. One that we need to understand, we need to map, we need to see where there's entry points, and then we need to, where we have access to them, break them open so that our partners who are doing work at a grassroots level on the ground in their communities have entry points and ways to access those spaces, particularly to build power in terms of that other core piece that Hindu mentioned of getting at the root cause of the problems. We see that there is a lot of transformation that can be built when we rely on global solidarity across feminist movements. And that is articulated when a group of activists who are working on an agroecological solution in somewhere in a community in Mozambique meets with another group of small-scale farmers based in a different region, understanding that they are finding the same challenges when it comes to the seeds that they're able to have access to, the ownership that they have at their land, and then we're able to have an ecosystem where we can not just leave it at understanding what the problem is, but actually saying we want to be, as feminists, women's rights activists, as Indigenous women, part of your trade agreements on seed patents. We want to be part of your climate change negotiations where you're talking about market mechanisms, because we know that these are the issues that are impacting us in our daily lives. So it's about building our solidarity analysis together and bringing that and translating it into the global policy spaces.
Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Bridget. And this is such a wonderful bridge, actually, to introducing. I see one more speaker here has joined. Forget. It's lovely to see you here. And I know you are, in fact, an activist, a feminist activist in the climate justice movement. You are an agribusiness entrepreneur. And so, Forget, I was wondering if you could tell us from your unique perspective, what next steps would be needed for, an education system that would serve really climate justice, taking into account also all those different acts that you have as an agribusiness entrepreneur, a feminist, and a climate justice activist.
Okay, thank you so much, and it's a pleasure joining the discussion. So, in terms of action in education, I think we should be more practical, because climate change is a practical issue. So we need to implement the experiential learning in terms of teaching our children at school the impact of climate change and how we can mitigate the effect in a very practical way. Meaning to say, if we are to implement sustainable ways, let's implement sustainable ways. So we should move from more theory to more practical, and the educate, like now, we should incorporate it in the education system, not as something that we do like just a part of education, but put it in the main streams of the courses at school, and learn how we can support our agricultural systems, because agriculture is one of the systems that also contribute to the global warming, and global warming is linked to climate change. So if we can come with more practical ways and encourage school children to take those practical ways to back home, to take those practical ways to the communities. For example, if we are saying, okay, we should not dump litter everywhere, or we should not burn this and that. So it's easy for the children to take that education home and to make it more practical. And children always make it like funny. And also when the government, schools, institution making budgets for the school, I think they should also consider putting a budget aside for climate change action in school.
Yeah.
So maybe making more for doing more events related to climate change education. For example, as it was in the case of HIV and AIDS, people can put a lot of resources, even dramatizing. If it's dramatizing, let it be dramatized, so that the message can sink to people.
Yeah, I think, those were such important points, looking really at resources to be allocated to this area, not having to rely only on the goodwill and the energy, ultimately, of activists that, take these issues because of their passion, but really a different level of commitment from governments, really needing to step up in this direction. I'm wondering if someone else wants to chip in on this and on particularly next steps that you'd like to see happening from governments, actions that are really needed to foster really this movement that, as Mary Robinson said, is so crucial, not only for gender equality and women's empowerment, but really to tackling the climate crisis. We have a few more minutes for, a couple more interventions. Hindu, I see.
Yeah, thank you. I think government need to move from the quota that they think to give to the gender, to the women's, counting like how many numbers that we have, especially when they are organizing like a panels, because now we are in all the virtual world. And when they have the virtual world, they think about, oh, we have all 4 men. Okay, let's look for 1 woman and 1 youth, because they are claiming at the international level. And if they found a young woman, and that's fine. Or then if they found like young African, Black, indigenous woman, okay, you fill all the box, and then they put you in the box. So I think they need to move from a checking box of having the gender representations to the real life that we are having. We have all the different expertise. And we saw that we cannot fight our environment alone. We have to be all together and have us as partners sitting in the same tables and discuss with them. So I think that can be a big step when they understand we are not a checkbox. We are not a numbers. We are a real peoples with the real experience, and we have a value to add, and we can take the decisions maybe better than man if it is not in the equal way. So if they understand that in a different administrations, I think that can change a little bit the way of solution that we wanted to drive and the action that we wanted to do in our world.
Thank you, Hindu. Going really beyond just kind of like descriptive representation toward really representative people and having those intersectional lenses. We really are at time. I wanted really to thank this amazing group, and maybe just to have you share one word that really exemplifies how you're feeling in this moment, and how you think that the conversation should continue. If there is one word that you think everyone should keep in mind in approaching education in a way that's really feminist and supportive of the climate justice movement, if there is one word that you would like us to remember to include in all the papers that we're going to write and have in mind in the next conferences that we're going to talk to, what would that word be? And those will be our, closing opportunity. And I will go again, through how I see you on my screen. Christina, your word.
Sure. So it's a 3-part word, one word, but a feminist planetary consciousness. I think that is what our education system really needs to orient itself around. That's what we need to be achieving as a result of our education.
I love it, and I'll definitely use it again. Feminist planetary consciousness. Renata.
I'm going to say investment, and that actually comes from a research that Christina did on the Brookings Institution, which is about investing in girls' education through practical skills like policy writing skills and debating skills for them to become leaders in the future. So I think investing in girls' education is at the core of what we're talking about here.
Wonderful. Marinelle.
I would say this is very common, but I think very, very important, intersectional, because though this is common, everyone, a lot of us actually forget about how important it is to always put that in our intervention, in our projects and actions.
Bridget.
Thank you. I'm going to say 2 words because I don't follow rules very well, but I would say power and care.
Wonderful. Hindu.
I can say rights and inclusiveness.
Wonderful. Forget.
Collaboration, and I also want to say 2 words: collaboration and sustainability.
Wonderful. And, you know, for me, probably I'd say connected leadership. I think there is amazing potential in the conversations that the women have in leading various movements, including the climate justice movement. I think that there is incredible potential in collaboration among women and really in ensuring women's leadership and in a way that can be transformational. I think that, you know, being part of a cohort of women leaders on various issues, including climate, makes an enormous difference. And so I have been thrilled to be in this cohort of amazing women leaders, and I know we will stay in touch and, you know, hopefully really drive some important change in this issue. I cannot thank you enough for having spent the time with me across different time zones. It's really early and really late for some of you, so thank you so much, and we'll continue this conversation and this fight. So thank you so much for your leadership.
Bye-bye, thank you.